Good evening, everyone. I am your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. Thank you all for joining us. Before we start, if you're new to the channel, please hit subscribe and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you are alerted whenever we go live. We're constantly adding cross streams with other channels and adding new shows. Speaking of new shows, I recorded our first episode of Pop Life. And by the time you see this, we'll have aired the second episode of Pop Life. It's a show where I talk about more pop culture stuff. From the first episode, I sat down with singer of influential hardcore metalcore band 18 Visions, James Hart. There were some slight audio issues, but it was still a cool talk. And there's going to be much more. And I will be joined most likely in the future with fellow musician and a frequent guest on this show, Pasquale Romero. So stay tuned and look out for that. Also, if you watch the show on YouTube, all of the other shows that we do on this channel, we actually have playlists for them. So Beyond the Red Zone, our sports show, there's a playlist for. Gaming Materialists with Eugene and Derek Varn, there's a playlist for. I believe there's even a playlist for Movie Night Extravaganza, which is no longer on the channel, but they had a year's worth of very quality leftist movie reviews with a variety of some amazing guests. Additionally, if you like what we do here and you want to see it continue and you have the means to further support the channel, for our patrons, we have the exclusive Champagne Room. It is our post-show after-hours hang where we have more ridiculous, uncensored fun, usually watching some weird movies that gets the main show demonetized. Depending on the level of patronage, you can get exclusive TIR merch. And at any level, you can join us for movie nights. And I keep talking about adding an extra fun movie night. But this month has been insane since one of our members here is getting married, and a lot of us will be taking off this week to the Great White North to join Deep State Cuba on for his wedding. Speaking of weddings, I want to introduce super producer. She is the faceless voice of reason on this show. Moderator extraordinaire, Amtu.
Hello. I'm unsure why you would be saying my name after speaking of weddings.
Oh, no reason. Just a
okay.
silly segue.
My mom's heart just dropped. Okay. No big deal. Just a little stroke. It's all right.
Oh, your mom thought you were marrying Cuba?
She is not picky at this point, I think.
Did you tell your mom that we have a no race mixing policy here at TIR? It's funny because I have beige kids. That's what makes it fun.
That's funny.
And Gene Bajlan is a race mixer.
That's right. He is race mixed.
He is himself muddish, and his children are all kinds of different. But Gene gets mistaken for a Latin man at the Home Depot.
Is that right? It's the ponytail.
It's where he lives.
Okay.
And the ponytail.
Big fan of that.
I'm going to see Gene, and he's probably going to punch me in the testicles in real life in like 3 days. He's stewing. I can see him in the virtual green room, and he's just sitting there like, oh, I am going to get a good shot too. I got a wide foot here, Miles. Let's bring in our favorite history professor at Missouri State University, Mean Eugene Bajlan.
Hi, Jason. How you doing? And I will say this. I'm not going to direct any violence towards you because I saw Hatchet Man, the man with the hatchet in his bag. And he looked very much like you. He dressed like you. And he had a hatchet in his bag. So, you know, I know when to avoid
So
hatchet-based violence.
So MT, so we did a show. You weren't on the show Saturday, so we did a show Saturday, and usually with Pascal on the show, I do a thing called trigger warning for those of you that are new to the show, and the trigger warning is just a way for me to anger Pascal, but also bring about a bit of a conversational point before we bring in our guest. And there was no Pascal, and I didn't think Gene was going to get angered by it, but I was watching this thing kind of before we went on air. I was with my son this past weekend in Los Angeles, so I didn't sleep much. So I saw this thing on I think Twitter, and it was a dude that somehow got into some altercation with some young people at a McDonald's. I did show it to you, MT. I showed it with us on the group chat. Speaking of how silly the group chat is, that's really what it's for. It's for memes and silly videos. But I laughed for an hour. I laughed for a straight hour watching it.
Why? Well, Jason also gave us a blow-by-blow account of the man's psychological state as he steadily got actually said, look, you see, now he's got the axe out, now he's giving the girl a talking to, now he's destroyed their mobile phone because he's tired and he's fed up, and now he's going home. He's like,
when you punch a man that many times in the head and he's eating your punches, and he's going like this, is that all you got?
He's going like this.
When he's sitting there like this, and when he's making this pose, the Malcolm X thinking pose on you, you hit him with the chair like it's pro wrestling.
Or you run.
It's not gonna. And then when he went to get in the back, MT, you are from New York. You're a native New Yorker.
Yeah, I am.
You see a fight in the McDonald's. Was it Delancey Street? Does that sound right?
Shut up. Yeah.
Okay. When you see a man that's just got punched in the head 47 times and stand there and go, and stand there like this and go, is that all you got? And then he goes and reaches in his bag. Do you ask him what he's going to do? B, stand around and wait to see what he pulls out of the bag? Or C, run your ass away?
Well, since you said it's 47 times, and that's a prime number, I would run. I would run. Or I'd move really far back and take out my camera and scream out World Star. Maybe. Depends on if I ate or not yet. Might not want to run.
When the man scares the kids and then punches the one kid and then gives the young lady a talking to about why she shouldn't hang out with people like this.
He didn't punch him. He slapped him.
Yeah.
He slapped him over. He didn't even deign to give to move his hand into a fist shape. He just slapped him.
It was huge. Like, why would you even think?
Why were they even starting on the bike messenger guy who's been in the gym all day?
I think, was it because of his shorts? His little shorts?
I think it was because of the shorts. They saw the shorts, they saw the backpack, and they were like, you're not going to do it. You're not a scary black person. He was like, okay.
Unreal.
He was bad. He had his hatchet in the bag. He knew the terrain of battle very well. And
he did.
He did. He knew the terrain of battle.
He knew all the exits. He knew everything.
Allegedly, Gene Bajlan is going to be cutting a clip of that conversation. Gene, myself, and Chris Catrone, and me giving a breakdown of basically what not to do when
you run into Jason's long lost twin.
Man.
Just don't try to fight people late night. I know everybody feels tough late night. Had a few drinks in them. They've listened to some music that got them all hyped up before they walked into the McDonald's.
Probably new metal music.
Give me something to break. And they were like, yeah. And that dude was like, I'm about to break your ass.
Cut my life into pieces.
Damn.
He attempted to cut their lives into pieces.
That music just takes me back to wandering around aimlessly in the Spiders nightclub in Hull in the early 2000s. Wandering around aimlessly, not drunk, looking at drunk people.
Okay, Gene, and just for us, for our own consumption, can someone, I'm throwing it out there into the universe of social media. People love messaging me all kinds of stuff, good and bad stuff. And there was that one time I did ask if someone could make the was it the Harriet Tubman Amex card?
That you had to put that away, right? We had to put away the Harriet Tubman Amex.
That was officially like, I think maybe we went too far. I don't think you'll be going too far if you put the Papa Roach Last Resort when the dude is smashing cell phones and slapping people upside the head. If you do that, we will post it on whatever social media we have if you get sent to us. Maybe we should ask Quinn to do that. You think Quinn could do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure Quinn could do that.
That would be amazing.
I'm sure you could do it, Jason.
Let's ask Quinn to do that.
Okay.
And by Quinn, he means Quintern.
Quintern.
The Quintern.
Intern, the intern.
Quintern the intern.
I love it. Are we ever going to let him come on air?
Yeah, we should let him come on air. He comes on air. He comes on Gaming Materialists.
Oh, you put him on air on Gaming Materialists?
Yeah, he's our back behind the scenes producer.
I kind of wanted to do him like MT, where no one knows what Quinn looks like.
Well, no, he doesn't. He does not show his face. He just gives his voice.
Quinn's smart. Quinn is smart. See, MT and Quinn can walk around the cities they live in respectively and not have anybody point at them and say, "That show you had last week, hated the thing that you said about the thing."
Let's be honest. No one does that to us either. Nobody in Rosarito is chasing you around.
If anyone came to me in Rosarito and watched the show, I'd be like, "Word?
Really?
No way."
Want to come to my terrace?
I got to tell you guys at some point about how picking up Catherine Liu got me stopped by the police when she came down here with her family.
Oh dear.
Recently. Yeah, I got stopped by the police trying to.
That's a champagne room conversation.
That is a champagne room conversation, so we'll have to do that. But I do want to bring in our guests. But before we bring in our guests, there's still tickets available for the LA show.
That's right.
Give them a revolution, October 23rd, 6 p.m. Give them a revolution. Give them an argument. Left Reckoning, Ben Burgess, Derek Varn, Matt Leck, David Griscom. Who else is going to be there?
Daniel Bessner.
Daniel Bessner is going to be there. He's nursing his sciatica right now and doing some like Rocky Balboa level Rocky IV training to get ready for the live show.
Hey, at least it's not syphilis.
He's pounding meat right now as we speak. This man is a professor.
No worry.
Like, whatever.
Our guest just turned his like, I can't do this. All of my reputation. I was in the post, damn it. Well, it's kind of understood that the last place where you hear the term fake news is with local journalism. We think there's not a lot of corporate interests influencing the reporting. But would you believe that behind garage sale listings and Rotary Club info is a hidden right-wing agenda? Our guest today wrote kind of a wonderful column. I'm really glad Gene brought this to my attention and booked this show because it's actually kind of right in line with what I've been working on. And I want to read a clip from the article Pink Slime Journalism. This is our guest. 10 years ago, I coined the term pink slime journalism to describe the sneaky way companies like Metric Media exploit Americans' lingering trust in local newspapers to peddle an inferior product. The term is a reference to the controversial paste-like meat byproduct that was, according to reports at the time, supposedly being added to ground beef on supermarket shelves without a label. If the yellow journalism of the 19th century can be defined by the sensationalistic, if it bleeds, it leads mentality, pink slime is the opposite. It wants to quietly smuggle low-quality pastel goo from a machine into your regular media diet. Faith in journalism in the age of, quote, fake news and algorithm-driven misinformation keeps dropping, but polls show that local news is still relatively well regarded. According to a 2019 Knight Foundation survey, local outlets are more trusted than national organizations by a wide margin of 45 to 31%. It's probably because local news focuses on issues that tend to be nonpartisan: weather, sports, obituaries, local elections. And the staff members are your neighbors and members of your community. Our guest, Ryan Zickgraf, is a freelance writer and journalist who's been featured in the Washington Post, The Onion, the AV Club, and much, much more. Please welcome, coming all the way live from Hotlanta, Ryan Zickgraf.
Yay.
Hey guys.
Hello. Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you, Ryan, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I actually believe this is an extremely important topic, as my latest video essay is going to be covering the way in which we digest media. So reading your piece was like, oh, this is so right up my alley. It's literally what I've been researching and trying to put together the whole thing about. I guess first off, I want to know, when do you think this co-optation of local news started, and why are people so quiet about it? I remember there was a bit of a fuss when the Las Vegas Review was purchased by Sheldon Adelson, the pro-Israel casino magnate, and there's kind of more talk around stuff like Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, but we don't really talk about the death of local journalism and smaller papers, that between consolidation and what you're reporting, it's actually kind of scary.
Yeah, well, as most people know, like local journalism has been dying for like the last 30 years, but it's just something that we're just used to experiencing. And because it's a lot, thousands of local outlets, when one falls, it's like, if a tree falls in a forest, anyone hear it?
Mm-hmm.
But we're kind of reaching a critical point where there are major American cities that don't have local journalism.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, to answer your question, there isn't much talk about local outlets. Everyone is so nationally focused, world focused, that it just kind of escapes the gaze of the media.
Well, to that point, do you think we're in a moment where and local news doesn't do as well as cable news, and of course cable news is always going to cover a national or federal perspective? What do we lose, in your opinion, when we are now disconnected from our local news?
We're losing connection with a lot of part of our lives that we actually have more influence over. Like, you and I cannot determine a presidential election or a congressional election, but there's a lot of things that we can do locally. I used to cover, speaking of local journalism, I used to cover zoning meetings all the time, and nobody would show up. Like, there's so little participation, but yet there is so much that our cities, our neighborhoods, that's just a big part of our lives that just kind of gets swept under the rug, I feel like.
We often talk about on this show, my co-host who will be with us for the champagne room part of the show, Pascal Robert, often talks about the 50-year counter-revolution that happens around the time that Nixon gets into office. The Powell memo gets written, and there seems to be a takeover of local politics by the right. School boards, like you said, city councils, and all the way in places like Texas, state houses. I feel that disconnection that we have with any sort of local reporting, because I almost feel like it's the leftover boomer generation and on the earlier end of the boomer generation, or maybe the only people that are even intrigued by local news, unless the local news becomes a national story, i.e. a police shooting. So when we talk about a lot of the new laws, especially when school boards, in San Francisco, where I'm from, the San Francisco Bay Area, a school board member got kicked off, but it was a big push from the right, and there was all kind of money flowing in, and also down to DA elections and even sheriff elections. So we have, it's become a bit of national news in Los Angeles that they have an extremely, corrupt isn't even the right word, violent gangs plural within the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. This is all the reasons why me personally, I think that, local news and our connection to it is important, and also our investment in our own local politics. But I feel like because we're so disconnected with local news, all we care about is politics from a federal level. So the CNNs of the world are going to cover AOC's dress at the Met Gala. But to your point, us bickering about it is a fruitless conversation when there's actually real deal things that we can do in our own communities to change the way they look.
I just moved from a city that had one newspaper, a weekly newspaper that was covering an area of 400,000, Mobile, Alabama. And the default paper actually was more right wing. The guy that runs it used to work for Trent Lott. Now, he talks about his nonpartisanship, but if you look at a lot of the decisions made in the coverage, it's very right wing. And so when I started writing more local news, there were people, there were liberals and progressives that were like, "This is amazing! How can there be more of this?" But there were no local outlets so there was just a news vacuum, and all there was basically right-wing news, and that's scary.
Is there there's a couple of ways to pass this. So obviously we can talk about local television channels, and there was a little bit of talk about the Sinclair Group and its conquest of several local television channels, but there are some local counterbalances, I guess, liberal outlets like National Public Radio and things like that. But we're dealing here with newspapers, and of course, in our current age, newspapers are increasingly read not as physical artifacts, but online. So could you pass a little bit the issue with, for example, established newspapers that are right-leaning, but perhaps even if they have a political slant, there is some kind of notion of journalistic professionalism and what you do as a journalist. And is that collapsing because journalism doesn't pay? It's not a profession that people can afford to go into, and so that professionalism that accompanied journalism has gone. And then the other one is the creation that you talk about of pseudo news outlets online that are very easy to do with an appropriate web application, where they're literally trying to trick people into thinking this is a legitimate professional news outlet when in fact it's a party political apparatus. Could you talk about those different issues and how that fits together?
So when you talked about it first, in journalism, I went to journalism school, and they talk about objectivity, which is this principle that you're supposed to, not have your own opinion, or that you're not supposed to be partisan, that you're supposed to, there's this sort of underlying principle of speaking truth to power. But now, of course, sometimes that's been used to make the Republican Party and the Democratic Party sort of equal, and you give equal time to both, which isn't necessarily supposed to be, but it's supposed to be that you're supposed to seek the truth, and like fight against the power no matter who's in charge. And I feel like, especially over the last 20 years, we've seen sort of the politicization of everything, and that more things are becoming more partisan Democrat and more Republican. And I feel like that journalism, partly with the financial pressures, is reflecting that reality, where we're starting to have more Republican news and Democrat news.
Mm-hmm.
And I was asked this question recently, like, well, isn't the threat of the Trump administration and fascism, isn't this mean that we should like abandon these because the stakes are too high to like keep principles? We should support, with journalism, that we should support the Democrats because the alternative is for fascism to rise. And I think that's giving it like a huge pass to Democrats.
Makes sense. When do you think this kind of polarization in news started? Where does it come from?
Well, I think some of it is a function of social media. I mean, you all know, you all seen how hyper partisan Twitter and a lot of social media is. And so many journalists spend like all their days, all their time on social media, that journalism reflects social media often more than it does, quote unquote, real life.
Right.
I did want to ask you about that, because it feels like we're in a moment where journalism is chasing social media and not the other way around, which you start to see kind of in the tail end of Obama's administration, where his tweets are becoming news stories, and then it really gets ramped up during the Trump administration, where he is literally press releasing by by his Twitter feed almost, which is something that maybe only 10 years ago we thought would be silly, to be using social media feeds as almost formal press releases. And I know you said social media has something to do with it, but I think even before social media becomes the behemoth that it is, it feels like mainstream news is very gossip driven at a certain point, especially as cable news starts to blow up post 9/11, and you get the rise of a lot of these shows that are, Crossfire, all those shows where it's just news as drama. And local reporting, even, where I'm from, there's a pretty good weekly. We have some good weeklies in the Bay Area that broke some pretty interesting stories, like PG&E. I learned more in the weekly investigative reporting about what was going on with PG&E and the fires and why than any other news story that I saw. But there is something about local reporting seems to stay true to an extent, like you said. Can you explain a little bit about what you were doing at the Media Metric? Am I saying it right?
I was working at Journalistic.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Journalistic.
Uh,
It was supposed to be like journalism and automatic.
When you were working with the geriatrics, can you explain a little bit about about what you were doing? Because we have a link in the description of the show wherever you guys are listening or watching to the Washington Post piece that Ryan wrote. But if you could kind of explain to us a little bit about how local journalism is being infiltrated by these right-wing companies.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this story is the dire financials of the local news industry. Like, the average print news consumer is definitely on the older side. And I think that Journalistic, this company that I worked for that was based in Chicago, was supposed to be an answer to some of the financial pressures, because Journalistic's model was, okay, what if we take local stories and offload that to poorly paid freelancers in the Philippines and other like super third world countries. They were doing stories about things that were happening in America. And most people have the assumption that, okay, these local stories I'm reading are being written by Bob down the street, but it turns out it was, these people like that were thousands of miles away.
One of my kids'
and
uncles.
Part of my job was to actually change their name to seem more American.
Wow.
That's really fascinating because, it's kind of a confluence of several different things. So we have obviously social media offering new technological opportunities to cut costs in journalism. You have the proletarianization of journalism in general, which is being, again, facilitated by information technology, which allows you to outsource work to people. And then because there's no money in journalism, and we have this political culture that I think Jason's correct. It predates social media's explosion. You can try it back to the 90s, where you have the proliferation of cable news, which begins to break down the monopoly of the kind of liberal, centrist liberalism of the Cold War era. And so suddenly it seems that the only avenue that local news can be financially viable is to cater to the political tastes of people. And the only way that it's going to be subsidized is if there are interest groups that are, and there always have been interest groups involved in media, but interest groups who are very directly promoting particular partisan lines. And it's almost like, the BreadTube, YouTube news sphere as well, that, that there's a financial incentive to it, but there's also a political incentive for these right-wing groups who will subsidize this to go into this vacuum that you're talking about.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of right-wingers in general made a decision years ago that there was a ceiling to how much their money and influence would change national politics, but they saw a huge vacuum in local news and saw that the price of entrance was very low. And with all these outlets disappearing, once they create these new outlets with right-wing leanings, well, what else is there to compete against? So at a certain point, it becomes the default.
And because MT, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
No, what I think is also interesting, it seems that by focusing liberals and the left to a certain degree are totally missing this, because liberal and left politics, as Jason pointed out, seems to have become so national focused, and it's almost like, it's pure entertainment as opposed to having any functionality, whereas local news does have this kind of concreteness to it, and it holds people who accountable for that, for the things that they do, as opposed to, I'm mad that, the Washington Post might expose some corruption of a national politician, but if that's not my congressman, why do I care? And the parallel in left media is that there's a whole media ecosystem that's based on bashing AOC, whether you like her or not. But it's like, AOC doesn't really matter to me in in Springfield because she's not my congressperson. And Jason, it's the same. Maybe it matters to MT. I don't know. Is she your congressperson?
I don't think MT is in the district.
I'm just outside of her district. It's possible that if they redistrict again, I'll be in her district, and then I'll have to care a lot more. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's interesting that we're so emotionally attached to the idea of AOC being the end all be all of politics because we're so disconnected, I think, with how the machine actually works, especially at the local level.
Yeah, can I give you an example?
Please.
So, I was living in Mobile, Alabama for 2 years, and in Mobile last year, they almost elected a dead man.
I remember
as
this.
a city councilman,
Mm-hmm.
and they did it because these white Republicans were trying to make the city more white by annexing thousands of white people. And so what they were doing is trying to overrule a Supreme Court ruling from the 80s that allowed the city of Mobile to have more Black city councilmen, that they needed a supermajority to overrule them. Well, they were trying to get past the supermajority for this annexation. Well, this city councilman who was for annexation died, and the mayor tried to push his mom to go in his stead. Anyway, it was a crazy story that no one, not even the locals, cared much about during this election. So the month before, I think there was a 72% turnout for the presidential election.
Mm-hmm.
For this really important local election that really would have determined the future of the city. It was like a 15% turnout. So, I mean, this is a problem everywhere where people just aren't really paying attention to what's going on in their backyard.
That's crazy.
Well, let me ask you this, because we have, I believe it's from Amazon, we have Ring, we have Nextdoor, we have Facebook, we have people snitching on their neighbors. So we're losing local news. Is it expressing itself in the people in these other places? Do you think there's a relationship?
Yeah. Yeah, Nextdoor, man, it is like institutionalizing Karenism, man.
It's professional
Seriously.
snitching. It's professional snitching
Yeah.
with a flare of self-awareness. Like, I'm not a snitch. I just see a Black person in my neighborhood.
Picking
And
up a
people do this
package.
through Facebook, don't they, as well? It's like, it's not just you have these apps,
That's
but
right.
like
Yeah.
you have Facebook working like this.
Yeah, and you know, local newspapers had their own problems, but and I actually used to be a crime reporter in Gene's backyard. I used to be a crime reporter in Jefferson City, Missouri.
Oh,
and I, you know, it was a flawed thing, but you know, we verified everything. We had a process that, you know, when we were writing about crimes. But without, you know, editors and without some of these local checks, I mean, you're seeing thing where people are posting on Facebook and they're just spreading crazy rumors and, you know, oh, there's a suspicious Black guy down the street, and everybody just takes their word for it. And it creates like these moral panics.
That's right.
That's pretty I mean, we see this in other parts of the world as well, you know, like Facebook and these kind of WhatsApp and all these things, you know, they used to organize pogroms. They used to organize,
the Philippines?
Yeah, in the Philippines, they used to organize massacres and things like that. So, you know, the problem, you know, it's not that these things are causing these things, but it's like, I guess it's like gasoline on a already burning fire of social degeneration. Because I think people can fetishize the technology too much and say, oh, it's the social media, it's the disinformation. But we have to ask a deeper question also, which is, well, why are people turning to Facebook and to like random websites online for their news. Well, there's a good reason for that, because they don't trust any of the institutions that exist in in liberal society. So there's a push and a pull to it as well. I think the problem we might come up with the liberal narrative, which I think your argument isn't, but I think some people might try and exploit your argument in this way,
Mhm.
is to say that, oh well, the issue is misinformation and tricks being played on people. But surely we need to ask a deeper question about why on earth in the first place people don't trust these local, why aren't people supporting local news? Why don't people trust national news? Why are people searching for alternative answers to questions and the answers that they want to hear?
I mean, I wish I had some good answers for you on why people don't support it. Local news. I mean, sometimes as somebody who has worked in local news off and on for the last 20 years or so, thinking about that people pay $100 a month in Netflix subscriptions and cable bills and all this, but they won't, give any money to local news. It hurts me a little bit, but I don't have any good answers for you, but I just feel like that there is still a lingering trust in the local newspaper that you see on people's porches. And I think that that's something that some of these, what I call pink slime organizations are exploiting. Again, they're trying to pull the partisanship into what wasn't there before, and they're not making it explicit. They're like, oh, we just care about accountability in government. But really it's about looking at government spending and being like, oh, that's bad.
Well, and also I feel like, again, back to local news, the only thing people tend to care about with local news is big murder stories, right? Like a cop shot somebody, or this husband killed his wife, and for whatever reason, this is going to be the husband that kills the wife that's going to be the big story, a la Scott Peterson and Lacey Peterson. I was talking with Derek Varn last night on his show, and we were talking about some of the bigger media stories that come out of the 90s. And if I was to, ask anyone, what's the biggest story out of the 90s? The trial of the century is OJ. That's a very non-political moment. But many things happen in the 90s, right? We get the fall of the Soviet Union. We get the war in the Balkans. That's never really brought up when we think about the 90s. It's from an American context. I can't speak for the UK.
Well, one of the problems that doesn't really get talked about much is the decoupling of stories to stand on their own merit and attention. When you had the, say, print edition of the New York Times, you're getting all sorts of stories. It could be crime, government, it could be business stories, it could be like just mundane shit. But they were all together in the same package, and you didn't have metrics on how many page views, how many retweets, stuff like that. But when you decouple it, of course, the sensationalistic crime stories are going to get the most eyeballs. And the problem is we're not subsidizing those like substantive stories that aren't quite as eye-catching, or has to do with like policy and other important things that may be boring for most people or just doesn't catch your attention. So that's part of the internet's role in destroying local journalism. And in general, like local journalism, you're just not going to get that many hits. Like there's, by definition, you're not going to get many page views. So a lot of these companies are all chasing the same national eyeballs.
And what's interesting is when you have these big time stories that do catch some sort of attention, and I'll go all the way back to the late 80s with New York and at MT. I think you might vaguely remember this, but the before the Central Park it was the Central Park rapist, the preppy murderer.
Mm-hmm.
And the police chief, the head investigator, and the district attorney were quote unquote heroes, but the tactics they used in getting the preppy murderer to confess tacitly to what he ended up, going to jail for, are the same tactics they used against, children, ostensibly, about a year later, which they end up kind of. It took years, it took the exoneration for them, and then the movie to be made about the whole situation on Netflix for them to catch real deal fallout, where Linda Fairstein, I believe, lost a position and got dropped by her publisher after that thing came out. But they've used the documentary as a way to almost whitewash their reputations as horrible people. And I actually remember following that story as much as I could back in California. And one of the things that sometimes a lot of these retellings do is to your point, they really change the narrative, and it becomes extremely almost the anti-hero that we have a bit of a love affair with in this country. And it's a weird one, because on one hand, I do believe across the board, people don't like watching the police snuff people out on body cams. I don't think anyone likes it, on a bipartisan level. But on the same hand, we have a love affair in this country with anti-heroes. And I haven't seen too much journalism really tackle this quandary, because it almost seems like it would go against orthodoxy to look at it any other way than, police saving the day, a la, the Night Stalker, which was one of the biggest cases that I can remember in the 80s, mass murder in the 80s here in California. But the only way they found the Night Stalker was because they beat up his cousin. The police did. And he was like, fine, it's Rich, But, beating up someone to find the Night Stalker is going to seem like, well, it was justified. But how many people get beat up, to not find anybody? And there was a beat at one point in time for, like you said, you had a crime beat, and a lot of these things are gone. So we can't even
in Chicago. In Chicago, where I worked as a journalist for 15 years, the paper that I used to work for, a weekly alternative weekly called Chicago Reader, did a series back in, I think, in the 80s or 90s, about a police torturer named John Birch.
I vaguely remember that. Yeah,
this series was amazing. It was this one dogged journalist that spent hundreds and hundreds of hours unearthing the story that the police department definitely didn't want to talk about, city government didn't want to talk about. I mean, it took a lot of groundwork for him to do these series of stories, and you can read a lot about it now. I mean, he was convicted. I believe he's in jail right now. But if it wasn't for this one local journalist, it might not have ever come to light. Now, that came out in an era where that newspaper was doing really well, so they could invest a lot of their resources on this one story, on this one series. But that kind of thing doesn't really happen on a local level. You might have investigative reporting on a national level about what's going on with Trump or the Biden, laptop, but nobody is doing these like local stories about corruption, especially in smaller cities. I mean, you even might see, the New York Times do stuff about Adams, but there's so many cities where there's no investigation going on, or just very little.
I mean, is that like a fundamental problem then? Because of the way that the market is it just impossible to have capitalist media that does serious investigative journalism? I mean, perhaps there was a time where it was a viable way to do this, but there doesn't people want entertainment, but just because something is popular doesn't necessarily make it good. If it was up to me, I would eat chocolate chips all day, but obviously, that's not necessarily a healthy option, and it leads to your physical degeneration. So the problem seems to be that there just isn't the market forces are driving this, and
Yep.
so unless you can decommodify at least some media, there's going to be no incentive for anyone to lose money on media unless they're pushing a very specific political agenda, like these pink slime politics people. So I don't. What is it? How can we get out of this, uh, given the nature of market forces in the media sphere? I mean, just to kind of finish the point and take it home. If you look at again like YouTube channels and things like that, people are driven. It's not, people talk about grifters, people talk about, people are lying about their politics, but the problem is more complicated. It's that people are kind of dragged along by their audience, and justify being dragged along by their audience because there's a financial incentive for it, and they rationalize that financial incentive for whatever reason they do. So the problem is the model of capitalist media, because it just doesn't want to promote this kind of um, investigative journalist, because there's no money in it, first of all, and secondly, it could be dangerous to you on a local level, to your financial interests or what have you.
Yeah, and to the point, like the only candidate in the 2020 presidential election that made this like a key part of their platform was actually Andrew Yang. And he proposed like a local journalism fund where you would get individually money to spend on news subscriptions. And it wasn't the perfect model, but it was something, because I do agree that in the attention economy, a lot of these local stories, these like meaty stories, aren't going to get a lot of eyeballs. They may get like important eyeballs, and the kind of eyeballs that can make change, but you're not going to get a mass audience to read a story about planning and zoning or corruption in the water department. Like in Mobile, the water department stole $250,000 recently.
Wow.
And
what did they spend it on?
What's that?
What did they spend it on?
Like designer clothes. It's ridiculous. Like they did a raid, and you can see like all these shoe boxes everywhere. They were sneakerheads.
Oh man,
There's no way that can't be
kind of
true.
awesome.
You know what's funny about all this? I actually blew the whistle on the place I was working at in Oakland because of some things that were going on there that were, insane. And I have a friend at the time. She was at the LA Times, and she connected me with the Times reporter that was covering housing, and they were like, "No, we're not going to cover this." Eventually, a local person that's a pretty big name, Davey D, had me on his show to talk about it on his radio show. But it's surprising. I had another friend that told a story about a judge that was sexually harassing his judicial assistants and had a horrible reputation for years of sexually harassing them, and no one wanted to cover the story. When this person actually presented it to the media, they were like, this isn't really interesting to us. And it wasn't just the sexual harassment, it was the fact that the entire county court system consolidated to cover and quiet the story, to the point that it literally never got out.
Yeah, and similarly, also in Mobile, there was a judge running for city council who was having sex with prisoners.
Oh God!
Jesus.
All right.
That old
because,
chestnut.
You know, yeah, he was spanking them in his office.
Unreal.
And there was some report. Well, I probably shouldn't say that one, but yeah, this guy was like a sex criminal who was a judge who was fired, and he was running, and he almost won because there was no local journalism. Be like, hey, why is this
What's the sex
prisoner
criminal? What's he
fucking dude, you know, running for city council?
Is local journalism?
Please.
Thank you. Is local journalism
Sorry.
considered expensive? I know investigative journalism is considered expensive, but local as well.
If you want it good, I
Mhm.
mean,
Good answer.
I've never been paid well to do local journalism, but I'm here. I did it. Yeah, I mean, they deserve the reporters and editors I know are all, you know, overworked and underpaid. That's for sure.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, investigative pieces definitely are more labor intensive, and you have to do the FOIAs. And there's a lot of states which are making it harder. They're throwing up more obstacles for FOIAs. I actually just did a FOIA for the Washington Post for Alabama, and used to be able to email it. Now I have to send a local letter stamped for them to respond. So yeah, a lot of these red states are making it more difficult to do journalism.
Wow. Real quick, Jason, let me ask another question.
Mhm.
Well, what can you tell me about Patch? Do you know anything about it, Patch, the local news?
Patch Adams.
Yeah, they've actually been around for a while. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's what's called a hyper local
Yes.
network of news sites, and they've survived. I'm actually surprised they're still around. I want to say they were funded initially by like Yahoo or something like that,
Mhm.
and the idea was to do kind of lower cost local journalism. But yeah, the funding model isn't really there, and because they don't have much money, they aren't able to fund a lot of work. So a lot of it is just like regurgitation or like just quick op-eds. I really don't find that they do great work, which is sad because the idea was good, but there's just not enough money behind it.
They cover yard sales, by the way.
No.
Hyper local.
Yard sales are an important part of American
if
life.
they can let me know where the vintage Star Wars figures are in like Pacoima, then I'm there.
And tell me who's running for dog catcher. Super important.
It is all day long, footing the dog's ass.
That's true. Well, one of my favorite things is to go around flea markets in Springfield looking for discarded Warhammer models for my eBay business.
That
Man,
is
that's
real
nerdy.
specific.
You're doing Antique Roadshow stuff too.
It's antique. I once got a mint condition Hero Quest board game from the early 90s, and I made so much money off it. It's brilliant. If that local journalist can help me with that stuff,
that's where we need local journalism. Can you find me a Will Clark rookie card in gem mint condition at the flea market in
Pulaski or in Crane, Missouri?
And Joplin. Can I go to the flea market in
You
Joplin?
can't go to Joplin, Jason. We've discussed this before. It's too dangerous for you.
That is true. But I have been to Jefferson City as well.
Do you know who's from Joplin, Missouri?
Janice.
Someone very famous. Not Janice, no. Langston Hughes.
Is he really?
Mm-hmm.
He's from New York.
No. He came. He.
Everyone came to New York.
He came to New York. Yeah.
Who was the black guy from New York?
He was a transplant.
Who was the black guy from New York?
Just
I'm
Pascal
going to say Baldwin.
Pascal.
Just the two of them. Only bursts on record.
Just the two of them. Colored dudes from New York. Just the two of them from New York.
That's quite beautiful.
Send that one to the tourist agency. They're gonna love that one.
Well, for those of you watching the show live, we are actually not live. This is all pre-recorded, so that's why we cannot respond to your comments, questions, or super chats. But please send them, because we will be watching the show live, as the champagne room for this show will be live. So,
Is that
all
a
that
first?
being said, yes, this is a first for us to pre-record the show and actually have a live champagne room. Ryan was not able to join us when we usually stream, but he will be able to join us for the champagne room, where Pascal Robert will be with us as well. So we're going to have a full-on crew show. Maybe if it's okay with MT, we'll take calls. I'm not sure.
I'll see how I feel.
See how she feels.
Are you guys going to wear the exact same thing? I will, if you will.
No, I'm not, because I want to be that kind of an asshole.
Jerk face. Ah.
I actually thought about it literally as I hit go live. I'm being totally serious. And I was like, I'm not going to wear the same thing.
I'm sitting in this interview like, I hope they wear the same clothes. Great.
I
I'll
actually
wear
have
the continuity.
You want to hear something even dumber?
Hmm.
Right when I hang up with you guys, I have another show to do, changing the shirt again.
Are you really?
Yep.
Ridiculous.
Wow.
What type of Western
Because they would
decadence?
see it back-to-back days. They'd be like, oh, Jason doesn't change his shirt.
And they would shame you.
They would shirt shame me.
Wardrobe change.
Wardrobe change. I'm like Sade in the early 2000s.
But it's going to be an.
Are you going to?
Go ahead, Ryan. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to ask if you're going to bring your axe for that one.
His axe had like a shield over it or something.
You know, it's funny. The only weapon I do own is a machete. Like, no bullshit. My dad gave me a machete. My dad, his wife had passed, and they gave me this car, and there was a machete in the back of it. And, you know, as he's cleaning it out, he's like, here. And I was like, what am I supposed to do with this? He said, niggas is crazy. And he just walked away.
Yeah. All right.
He knew the terrain of battle.
You need to get it engraved.
Jason's dad knew the terrain of battle. And he knows that the machete, because people think they're going to be running around with guns and stuff. Look, no. Quick action. Quick Roman short sword in the stomach.
Like, you think about, like, what situation am I going to be in? I get cut off and I'm just going to pull out a machete, just stare at somebody with it in my hand like this.
Works for fan drivers.
Well, if you go to Scandinavia, you could kill like 100 people with it. So.
Look at that. Or Japan, apparently.
Oh, too soon.
Too soon. Sorry. R.I.P. to a real one.
Yeah, but we do. I mean, the machete is now the symbol of the Mau Mau hour. So
that's true.
That it is. So I'm excited for is the Mau Mau going to happen while we're gone?
No, it's happening the week after.
Okay, well then I'll shut up now. Thank you very much, Ryan, for joining us. If you guys want to hear more, be a part of the conversation, we will answer all of your questions, comments live in the champagne room. Hopefully, by the time this show airs, Gene Bajlan will have cut the clip of our breakdown of Hatchet Man in McDonald's, what to do, and also what a keeper looks like, because the young lady that stands in front of her boyfriend while Hatchet Man is going crazy.
We discussed this, though. We discussed this. Sarah Bajlan disagrees very heavily with the notion that woman felt any threat whatsoever.
When you're 16 years old and there's a big buff black dude running around with a hatchet, smashing cell phones and slapping the fire out of your friends, I think you don't know what you're doing at that point, and everyone probably had a bowel movement. And on that note,
wow.
Don't you think an Oreo McFlurry could have diffused the situation? That's what I would have done. Right,
those are awesome.
McFlurries.
I think you're right.
Yeah, it makes everyone happy.
Bringing the world together.
I think if you know what, we have to send Ryan the video, because he has to. You know what, Ryan? In the champagne room, we're going to open the champagne room with the video so you can see and you can break it down yourself for the flaws in the young people's game of where they went wrong in the situation.
They went wrong many places.
I'm ready. This sounds like local journalism to me.
There we go.
You know what? And then we're gonna hold the screenshot because there is a dude. Someone screenshotted it, and I have to show you guys. There's a dude who's watching the thing that looks like he just traveled in time because he's a farmer, and this is supposed to be in downtown New York. And he's like an old black man in overalls and some farmer shit on.
Why are you sharecropping in Brooklyn? What's going on?
I was like, what kind of urban farm did this dude just walk out of?
Probably one of
Maybe.
MT's friends.
Right. It's true.
Green
maybe.
Revolution.
Right.
It's a green revolution.
Get you some veggies.
Well, it looks like John Henry just stepped out of a time machine, so we are gonna have to comment on that as well. But thank you very much, Ryan, and we will see you
Appreciate
guys
it.
in the champagne room. And we are MT
Out.